In kāvyaśāstra, the concept of Aucitya functioned in two ways. Firstly, it set models for the representation of each character type and emotion, and encouraged the creative writers to follow them intently. Secondly, it instigated the writers to censor situations that go against the accepted practices of the time. The tendency to prescribe the ideal model for the representation of each character type and emotions in fact starts from Bharata's Natyashastra onwards. First, let's take a look at the first mechanism, that is, setting models for the representation of character types and emotions. Although many literary theoreticians in fact have talked about this tendency or method, today we are going to look at only two representatives, namely Bharata and Anandavardhana. On the basis of the degree to which characters conformed to the notion of Aucitya, Bharata divided the characters into three broad categories, such as the noble characters or Uttama, middle characters or Madhyama, and the inferior characters or Adhama. Bharata gave clear mandates to creative writers as to how they should present each of these characters. For example, according to Bharata, an Uttama female character should always be unperturbed by anything unpleasant. She should not speak harshly to her lover. She should not retain her anger for long and should not conceal the mistakes she has committed. Being complaint with the dominant social order, she is always desired by men. A Madhyama female character, on the other hand, is always short-tempered. She reciprocates the love of whoever loves her. She is jealous of her rivals in love and is good at the art of lovemaking. An Adhama woman's character does not agree with the general conception of how an ideal woman is supposed to behave in the society. She will express her anger without thinking about the propriety of place and time. She will not conform to the code of conduct and will be harsh and proud. Bharata's dictum is that a creative writer should unfailingly and appropriately ascribe these qualities to each character type during their representation in an art form. In other words, a creative writer cannot represent an Uttama character with the qualities of an Adhama character and vice versa. Bharata had also given clear instructions as to how a person belonging to a particular social category should express emotions. For instance, Bharata says that in the expression of hasya rasa or the aesthetic emotion of the comic, the noble characters or the Uttama characters should resort only to an open laughter and a smile. The middling characters or Madhyama characters should express it through the open laughter and laughter of ridicule. It is only the low or Adhama characters who can resort to obscene laughter and boisterous laughter. Bharata's exposition likewise extends to other emotions, paying minute attention to even the movements of eyebrows. In this sense, there is a similarity between the concept of Aucitya and the Greek concept of decorum, which we are familiar with. Another case in point is Bharata's description of 8 kinds of heroines or Ashtanayikas in 8 different moods. These 8 categories of women that Bharata mentions include Vasaka Sajja, or the heroine who is ready to meet her lover, Virahot Khandita, or the heroine whose husband is away from her, Aswadhina Bhartrika, or the heroine whose lover is captivated by another woman, Kalahantarida, or the heroine whose lover got separated from her after a quarrel, Khandida, or the heroine whose husband is enamored by another woman, Vipralabdha, or the heroine whose lover has broken his promise on a tryst, Proshida Bhartriga, or the heroine whose lover is abroad on an important mission, and Abhisarika, or the heroine who goes after her lover. Bharata gives a detailed mandate as to how these heroines should be represented in various situations. For instance, let's see how an Abhisarika of libertine, noble and maid varieties should behave during their tryst with their lovers. Bharata says, whether a courtesan or a noble born or a maid servant, a woman, when she is an abhisarika, should act as follows. If a courtesan, she must deck herself with various ornaments and she must walk slowly in the company of her servants. If a high-born lady, she could cover herself with a veil and walk timidly and with downcast eyes in a lurking manner. If a maid servant, she should walk with uneven steps, eyes beaming with joy, gesturing and babbling under the influence of intoxication. If the lover is in bed and asleep, she should awaken him in the following manner. A high-born lady should awaken him with the sound of ornaments, a courtesan by her scents, and a maid-servant by fanning him with her clothes. Bharata's concept of Ashtanayika was highly influential not only for drama but also for literature, music and painting. For instance, Thaniga and Dhananjaya's Dasharupaka, Vishwanatha's Sahitya Darpana, Bhoja's Shringara Prakasha, etc. follow this tradition of setting the models of various kinds of heroines for creative writers. Bhanudatta's description of Nayikas in Rasa Tarangani and Rasa Manjari is obviously inspired by Bharata's description of heroines in Natyashastra. It also influenced a lot of kāvyaśāstra texts like Kuttanimat. Keshavadasa's Rasiga Priya in Hindi also draws upon Bharata's notion of Ashtanayikas. The medieval paintings such as Ragamaliga painting also got influenced by this description of heroines. Another example that I can cite in this regard is his instruction of propriety with respect to the portrayal of Shringara Rasa. In the 6th chapter of Natyashastra, Bharata opines that the source of Shringara Rasa should always be a young heterosexual couple belonging to the noble category. Anandavardhana also holds the same view. Ananda talks about the importance of avoiding the improper representation of Shringara Rasa in the case of characters belonging to the Uttama category like kings and gods. Anandavardhana observes, accordingly, whether in the literature of performance or in poetry which is not performed, the description of vulgar sexual enjoyment between characters of the upper class, kings and ladies, is highly indecent, just like the description of the sexual enjoyment of our parents. Precisely, the same charge appears within the sphere of the gods. Furthermore, sexual intercourse or Sambhoga Shringara is not the only form of love in enjoyment. Other forms such as the interchange of glances and the like are possible and can be used in writing of upper class characters. Thus, that which is appropriate to the character is to be followed in treating of sexual desire or rati just as of energy. Anandavardhana is also against interchangeably using the attributes of behavior ascribed to various character types. He believes that since the ways and manners of degenerate characters are completely antithetical to the propriety of the period, ascription of the character traits of the degenerate characters to the noble characters will absolutely ruin the greatness of noble characters. Ananda says, thus, if we assign a type of love to characters of the upper class by recourse to what is appropriate to the lower class, how ridiculous will be the result. Even in India, what is appropriate in love differs according to the 3 classes of men, Uttama, Madhyama and Adhama. These directives as to how different character types should behave are not just limited to these 8 heroines we have seen. It covers a wide range of areas such as how a hero should behave, how a scene of love making should be depicted, how a heroine should behave towards her guilty lover, how male characters of different character traits such as Chatura or clever Uttama or noble, Madhyama or middling, Athama or degenerate or low-born, and Sambravartaga or a lover who is indifferent to fear and anger should behave in front of a courtesan, how the friend of a lover should behave, and so on. This tendency of setting appropriate models for the representation of different character types and aesthetic emotions run through the length and breadth of the entire kāvyaśāstra tradition in India. Dhananjaya's Dasharupaka, Bhanudatta's Rasamanjari and Rasatarangini, Vidyanatha's Prataparudriya, and Bhoja's Sringara Prakasha are a few other texts that give directives in this manner. For a detailed reading on these aspects from these texts I just mentioned, you can refer to the second chapter of Dasharupaka, where Dhananjaya in detail talks about the details of the qualities of a hero, various categories of heroes, the characteristics of the helpers of a hero, antagonists, different kinds of heroines, the qualities that are to be attributed to the sidekicks of a hero. The second chapter or Prakarana of Vidyanatha's Prataparudriya is also concerned with the representation of heroes and heroines. In Bhoja's Sringara Prakasha, you can in fact refer to chapters 21 and 32, which talk about the representation of heroes and heroines. In Rasamanjari, you can see the description on Nayika and Nayaka. And finally, in Rasatarangini, Bhanudatta in 8 chapters talks about the way in which each emotion has to be represented.